I want everyone to sort of start picking up on some of that commonality.
Yeah, the migration patterns and understanding that went from different places down south to different places up north. You have migration patterns that went from the Carolinas and Virginia and a lot of those areas that stayed on the eastern seaboard. Some places in Mississippi and Alabama went toward Chicago and Detroit. And those migration patterns gave a real sense of where a lot of folks would settle because they would send back home and say, it's good, the streets are lined with gold, everything's great and wonderful. And that same type of issue starts to happen when you have new immigrants coming in to different areas. One of the concerns that a lot of folks have is this, and let's talk about it, not in my backyard, that whole concept of they're moving in and taking over my community, when indeed the whole process of changing of communities has been ongoing. I think someone said something before. I don't know who said the term melting pot. But I would just say that the melting pot is a euphemism for trying to keep things the same. Because one of the things in a community where there's real melting pot is you can't tell the difference because all the cultures are blended together and then it's wiped out. One of the things about America was that the melting pot theory does not work in America because everybody's not the same, and there's always has been, since we came over before 1620, one differentiating factor that avoided the melting pot being real, and it was skin color and skin tonation. Even though you could say, oh, well, listen, I want to be Irish. If you were black, you were black. You know, so the reality of that. So we need to also talk about terms that people oftentimes use that are not helpful.
The biggest one that I want to definitely make sure we touch on is this idea that we live in New York, right? So we think for some reason that we're different than the rest of the country. We're different than the rest of the world. There's something different about it. We're more progressive. We're more, and Gabby kind of talks to that, right? We live in the most segregated suburbs in the nation. And within that segregation, you have a number of different ways in which people segregate themselves even more. So the first question to the panel is going to be, identify one major division. And I realize this is a little impromptu, so, you know, and I'll take whoever wants to go first, right? Tell me, what is one of the biggest divisions that you think is in place that kind of keeps this community divided, that keeps our communities divided? What's one thing that you really think?
Misconception.
Explain.
Misconception is because people bring their own biases and cultural differences to the table without being open-minded from the get-go. People hear different stories about people of color. They act like this, or they're this type of person, or that's the way they're going to handle it. We were at the high school trying to address concern one day, and they brought all the kids into the auditorium. And one of the things I noticed is that it's like the union, it was divided. You had blacks on one side, Latinos on another side. And the first thing we did is you were there that day, and we tried to get the kids to integrate and actually sit among one another, and that was an issue. Not so much that the kids couldn't do it on their own, as it was the fear of reprisal or someone else saying or doing something when they leave there, the perception. That has to disappear. We have to get rid of that.
Language. That's another thing. I don't know what you're saying. You're talking about me. You know, it's language. I mean, we can't communicate. You know, if I don't know what you're saying, you don't know what I'm saying. We can't communicate with each other. So I don't know what the solution is because I'm too old to learn Spanish. I can learn a few. I know a few words. But I feel like you gotta, with the children, you gotta make it so that they can communicate with each other.
It's not just my own personal opinion.
Once you go, we gotta go to the next one. We'll
Oh,
come back around. We'll come back around.
Anybody else? Gabby?
I think it's just a central theme, possibly, but it's just lack of knowledge and lack of empathy. I see on behalf of the community, you know, growing up in this community was always tough, being in school and hearing things like that.
I just want to start with this. When you say empathy, you mean understanding, or what do you use the term empathy?
Definitely understanding, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely understanding, to lack of knowledge about the different
one says misconception, one says language, one says lack of knowledge. The other thing that causes division, that I believe, is a sense of entitlement, particularly from minority communities, that nobody wants to work anymore. That we think because we are minorities that oftentimes we have to be handed everything, that doors ought to be automatically open for us. So oftentimes in our own community we don't work together because we're too busy fighting each other because we think there's a sense of entitlement that we deserve.